you think of a PC that has like 2.4 gigahertz clock cycle, that's doing 2.4 million calculations a second. You know, so the data rate is just, it's beyond sort of mental comprehension in a way. I mean, it's not, but it kind of is. So these things have to stay uninterrupted so that, yeah, it's that really.
But on the scale of, we say, a data center, what's the fundamental? Can we kind of imagine a much bigger version of the hard drive on our desktop computer that's buzzing away frantically as we're working, or it's downloading the latest version? Is it a much larger version of that? Like that's something that's putting information on a disk, or multiple arrays of that type of machinery, or what's the basic?
I mean, I guess so. I mean, I'm not 100% sure of what you mean by a data center, but just taking it on face value, you're gonna have a bunch of storage, and you're gonna have a bunch of routers and matrices that connect not just A to B, but A to Z. To there'll be a million nodes that it will connect to, and it's capable of connecting all of those nodes to any other node, or any node to any number of other nodes. So you've got a whole bunch of switching going on. There'll be some storage going on where things are coming in just to be stored, to be retrieved at a later date. And that later date might be a fraction of a second later. It might be a month. It might be a year. It might, however it's being used. So you've got this almost sort of infinite way of not infinite way of transmitting, but there's loads and loads of variables of how that data is moving around, but they're all kind of dynamic, as it's being generated and consumed. That's all being managed, and it's all happening so fast. Like if it was the post office, if the post office closes for a day, it doesn't matter, all your letters arrive one day later, but we're zooming right in. We're talking of like fractions of seconds here.
But sorry, but just out of curiosity, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but to the best of your knowledge,
I'll answer if I can. If I can,
to the best of your knowledge, the main, like we're hearing about this big draw for power. Like, what is the main? Do you know, in the most simplest terms, in the component terms, what is the main power draw in that type of equipment? As it were, is it just the multiplicity of it, or is there certain processes that are huge?
Yeah. I think it's just the scale of it. If you like I say, if you can stuff 50 two-way conversations down one pair of copper wires, if you then move into a coaxial cable, which if you're not aware of what that is, that's like the fat round one where it's got a single conductor in the middle, and then like a sheath around the outside. And it's designed that way to it gives a characteristic to that cable that allows digital information to be transmitted. It's like putting a radio wave down a wire, and then within that you can then things called multiplexing and modulation are like techniques for getting multiple channels transmitted simultaneously. Although what actually they do is they cut them up into very small packets, and then they'll send. They'll sort of, if there's 100 lines going down one line, they'll go a little bit of one, a little bit of two, a little bit of three, all the way around to 100, and then keep repeating. So they're sort of chopping it up and sending it down the wire. So I think it's just the scale of it. I mean, in terms of power draw, it will be the transmission that will be, because there's no real moving parts anymore. I don't imagine they're using hard drives that have to spin up. It'll all be flash memory, right? Which is, it's also it's very low current. But I think it's just the scale of it. There's just such an immense amount of hardware, and it's that really. That's where the power is. It's not.
But I was shocked today, like to see, when you to just go on the job and see jet engines been installed to try and boost up the electrical grid, and as you said, there are scale. Like it's at that point you start to get a real kind of sense of the scale of where we're at in terms of infrastructure, and where we actually are as a fucking as a species with regard to technology, and we're right on this tsunami of information and data that just completely has engulfed us. Like we're still probably of the generation that remember what it was like before, or we're near enough to it when it
Yeah, I
wasn't
mean,
like this. But
I'm in my 50s, so when I was a kid, all we had was a landline
yeah,
and like three TV channels. And then now,
yeah.
within my lifetime, it's nuts.
Well, even you're saying there, you mentioned there about the studies you did do and how it's slightly antiquated, but like as you say, even the older stuff has been reimagined. Like back in the day, we had
Yeah,
a scanner radio here that we used to, we listen into the local whoever we
yeah,
could get,
right,
the fire
yeah,
brigade or whatever. But now
yeah,
you get this new Quan Chang radio that's got a microchip in there for 20 quid off Amazon,
yeah.
and you can upload the firmware and change the bandwidths on it, and it has a spectrum analyzer, and you can fucking thing is unbelievable. Like
Yeah, because
you
everything's become miniaturized, like the march of technology has just miniaturized everything. Like I've got a good audio book on the go actually, which is to do with, it's called Conquering the Electron, and it's just like a history of how we've conquered the electron, how we've harnessed its
mm,
ability and how we've gone from old relay based systems and then into valves, and how valves were invented, and then how valves became semiconductors, and how
yeah,
semiconductors, and all the players and all the companies that were involved in that, and how some of them were sort of accidental discoveries, but quite often it's just this determined. Somebody gets a seed of an idea and they go, right, we think this is going to work. And how it ties into sort of metallurgy and chemistry, and you know, it's pretty incredible. But it kind of lays it out, and you can see the evolution of it and how we've arrived at where we are today. But it just allows things to be scaled up. I mean, the other thing I would say about a turbine is a turbine can run on a variety of fuels.
yeah.
That's one of the beauties of a turbine. So you can run it on paraffin, or I mean, there was, I think there's an American car, I forget what it's called, and it had a turbine in it. It was like not a one-off, but they did put it into production, and
Yeah.
they took it around the world to sort of showcase it, and they took it to Paris, and they ran it on Chanel number 5.
Wow.
Just as like what do you call it, like a marketing thing.
Yeah.
They filled
Well,
up the
when
tank
you
with.
say turbine, like the last turbine engines I came across, I remember coming across, were in the M1 Abrams, the main
Yeah,
battle
that
tank.
sort of thing. Yeah, and the Abrams it's for the same reason. So they're out in the. I mean, it's the most efficient way of burning a hydrocarbon for power. That's the first
Well,
thing.
when you say turbine, are we talking something that looks similar to a jet engine, literally with the
Yeah, yeah,
turbofan kind of
yeah.
fins on it and whatnot?
A jet engine is a turbine. Well, it's a turbo fan, but the turbine is the basic heart of it, and then they've sort of evolved in. It's a thing called a turbo fan. So there's like a bypass element to draw more air in that bypasses the turbine and joins in at the exhaust just to create more boost, kind of idea. But a basic turbine, like the original jet engine, the first one that was invented, it is a turbine, and all it is the exhaust. When the fuel and the air are burnt, and it passes over the turbines, which is just like a big windmill at the back,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
that spins a shaft that runs through the engine, and then that turns the fans at the inlet that sucks the
Yeah.
air in. So
Yeah.
you have to shut off the fuel supply to stop it. I mean, that's the same for a lot of engines, really. Although in a petrol engine you can cut off the spark, but in the turbine, you have to shut off the fuel for it to
One
stop.
thing I
And
noticed that they had down there today was a big delivery of like semi-detached house size, size of a small house, filtration units, and they were
what,
after
air or
coming in
liquid?
from. Well, that's the question. I don't know. These were big cuboid, literally the size of a two-bedroom kind of up down
Wow.
townhouse, and they were after coming in from Dubai or Abu Dhabi or somewhere. But I
Right.
was wondering, I was thinking either they're filtration for exhaust fumes or for air intake, perhaps. But
Yeah,
I
it
was,
could be either of those or possibly both. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I know with turbo. I mean, I know modern turbofan engines that you get on commercial aircraft. They burn very efficiently, and all you get
mm,
out the back, more or less, all you get out the back is water vapor and a bit and some CO2. Um,
But
so maybe it's the air inlet, but yeah, I wouldn't know really. It's
mm,
a little bit outside my knowledge.
but in terms, like, the more curious thing is this data, its capacity to feed a central algorithm that was, based on, it had a machine learning capacity, centralized, like a world hub machine learning entity that, Uber AI, fucking, being. Do you think it's possible, like, that all this stuff can be just wired up together, and that, you get a machine learning, or how would you go about even designing something like that? That, like, how would you harvest endless fields of, of the harvest? Like, if there's endless fields, where do you begin? How would you begin to filter out? Like,
It's
you'd
like
have to write for, in terms of, say, for political control, or for social control. Like, you'd have to design. Let me try and answer my own question before I drag you in any further. Stafford Beer, who we've talked about here from time to time, is British. What's the name of the field, Silas? Stafford Beer
Cybernetics.
Cybernetics. And Stafford Beer had, what did he call it? The perfect system, or the ideal system?
Viable system model.
Viable system model. So viable, it's a systems model that actually they were interested down in Chile, and I think the president of Chile paid for it with his life, because seemingly the model was a way to structure an organization or a country along a kind of an ideal mechanism of interaction and control and power. But it could be used for, for a benign reason or for a good reason, but it could be subverted as well, potentially. So the kind of idea we've thrown around in the past is that an algorithm has been written around this system, and that algorithm is learning off this data. It's harvesting specific relevant data that it's going to use for kind of malign, perhaps,
I mean, I
purposes.
guess, you guess. I mean, data is just data, right? And it could be
Yeah.
mathematical or it could be language. So if you're talking about harvesting our data, then it's things that we say, isn't it? Whether
Mm,
whether through text or voice. So I guess I mean, it's like that old adage, isn't it? How do you eat an elephant? Like one bite at a time, right? So
yeah.
I guess the first thing you'd have to do is from that stream of data is to, because they talk about keywords, don't they? So you can go onto Google Analytics and say, okay, let's say Trump. You go, who's
Mm,
searching for Trump? And you can see how often that comes up in the data that Google has access to. And then you'd have your algorithm. So somebody has to be behind it and go, well, what is it that we want to know? So how do we go about knowing that? And if you want to know who's talking about Trump, then the first thing you're going to say to your algorithm is pick out all the instances of Trump being mentioned, and then it might be Trump as in Trump and impeach, or
mm,
Trump and MAGA, or
mm,
and then that kind of thing. And then you might go a little bit further and go, okay, people who have already spoken about insurrection. So anybody who's ever mentioned insurrection, and then we'll cross-reference that with those same people who have mentioned Trump and MAGA. And you just have to do it like that, wouldn't you? So you just got teams
mm.
and teams and teams of people. Someone at the top of the pyramid wants to know, and then as it filters down, you need more and more people to make that happen. I guess it's just vast, isn't it? I think that's part of the problem. Is that there's so much data, there's so many people in the world, there's so much conversation happening electronically
And
that
these ideas we've been throwing around recently, like, that we're in the data soup, so to speak, but there's
yeah,
actually the infrastructure and architecture of the data harvest system is all around us, insofar as that your public street light, your cell phone, your Bluetooth system in your car, all of it can be subverted via the back door to glean information about what you're
yeah,
doing.
yeah,
Where
absolutely.
where what do you think? Is that very paranoid, far-fetched stuff, or is that
No, I
legitimate?
don't. I don't. I think it's legitimate. I think one of the things to sort of get a handle on it is the absolute vastness of it,
Yeah.
and I think there's so much data being collected that there just isn't the capability to monitor it all. So I'll give you an example. So my sister, she's quite high up in IT. She's a director of IT, and she's the director of IT for 3 police forces. They've kind of pulled their IT under one heading, and she's the head of that. And she's not been in it very long. And I was talking to her about it, and she was saying, you know, this is just the police, so we can imagine this being scaled up to, you know, the elites, whatever.
Yeah.
So they don't. It's impossible to monitor everyone. So they just as people get noticed. So let's say this chat. Let's say we were really being subversive. We're like the Guy Fawkes of the modern age.
Yeah.
You know, eventually one of us would be noticed, or some of us would be noticed, and then all of a sudden eyes are on us, and then their resources would be put on us, and all of a sudden all this picking out keywords and seeing our movements and all this kind of thing. That's how it would go currently. That's not to say that what my sister is exposed to, that might not be the highest level, and likely isn't the highest level of capability. And there may well come a day when an AI algorithm is powerful enough to monitor all of us in real time. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. I just don't think it's very probable.
Well, you're always dealing with, as you kind of intuitively picked out there, patterns are a huge part of machine learning, because it's, as you say, it's too vast, disparate, and chaotic.
I mean, that's how they measure IQ, right? Like, I mean, I've done the Mensa test, and it's about pattern recognition. That's it. Like 90% of the Mensa test is pattern recognition.
And I want to kind of make a quick point, following on from, you know, your description of the kind of police side of it, and how you know, using data to affect the Project Maven thing, Google Analytics data, selling data to the military for the use of, you know, unmanned systems, unmanned weapons, essentially drones, etc. And one of the things that I heard recently that ties in with what you said is that they wouldn't know who's the enemy. So as you say, it's when a person becomes recognized, or a recognized threat.
Yeah.
So say, for example, a terrorist. So what defines terrorists? Well, they'd have to fulfill the following, you know, 25 criteria, and that equals terrorist. So what they do then with the project is that they will use that as a model. They'll build a model on that. That's the pattern, and they'll apply that model then to the following, you know, 1,000 suspects, and anyone who fits that criteria is getting whacked. Is getting, you know, getting a bullet from the drone.
They'll get a closer look until they cross that threshold where they're now, like you say, they're going to be a target. I think that's how it works currently, and maybe far into the future as well. I mean, that's
you could scale it back into something much less dramatic, where, you know, it's not anything like an existential threat, like a kill threat. Something that's much more low key. That could be a political development, or a kind of there's a dissent. We're detecting dissent here, and your criteria are still there, but they're a lot less dramatic. They're more subtle. So you're looking for kind of subtle changes. And, you know, you might have a whole bunch of subcategories of that, and feeding that into a central algorithm.
And the response might be more benign as well. They might just kind of steer you away from it rather than actively.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
That ties into the viable system model as well, because you have various orders, so various generations, if you will, of cyberneticists. But the primary similarity between them all is trying to find this viable system model, or this system of autopoiesis, this system that is self-regulating. And the way the cyberneticists view, and this is probably the way that, you know, technocrats and even the sort of managerialist class view human beings and society, that is like an electric circuit.
This is like Silent Wars for quiet.
It's exactly like that, actually. It's whoever, if that was a hoax, probably what was written in that quiet weapons for silent wars, I can imagine it was probably taken from the father of cybernetics, Norbert Wiener, his book Human Use of Human Beings, and there's another one, I believe it's called Cybernetics. I forget the subtitle, but it's very similar to that idea of viewing society in that way. And this ties into obviously Stafford Beer's evolution through management theory, and some of his geometric, the sort of geometric patterns or the geometric structures or the hierarchical structures for informational systems is very similar to the way a data center today is structured. So the core, the aggregation, the access networks, all the way down, to the servers. So, what he was looking to do, and it's what the third order cyberneticists are looking to do with the likes of the global brain. This is a Belgian cyberneticist called Halligan. I forget his first name. He wants to create a global brain, which is very similar to what Harari speaks of with the Internet of All Things. Essentially, I think they want a system where, see, the problem with command and control economies and societies, or Marxist economies and what have you, is they're very rigid and brittle. And because the centralizing force of it is so, it can become so out of touch. It can actually become very out of touch with the peasantry, the plebs, or the plebeian class rather. It can become very out of touch with the general running of the system, because it's so paranoid. It clings to power so much that it becomes almost isolated, insulated. And the way this system seeks to work is that, and Norbert Wiener stated it, that we literally will graft. This is what he says. We will graft artificial sense organs onto people, which will or they can be handheld devices, which we do have today.
I was going to say,
which feed constantly into the system, feed the algorithm, and that's of course something that
so it can adapt.
So it can predict more. It's like what you were mentioning, pattern recognition. So the more data you feed it, the more accurate its predictions will be. Yeah. Theoretically. Yeah. So
this is the sorry to interject there, but
okay.
I think we've spoken of this a few times. I know we have with Zeal, and that the idea that the current sort of state of they and them and those in power, those we call the elite, it does seem, it could be on some level. I don't know what any of you think of this. That's the kind of governing algorithm at the moment that these types feed off. In a sense, it's not necessarily. Might be particular agendas or intentions from individuals these days. I'd say, originally that may have been the case, but these days it would seem it's possibly more of a cultivation of data that kind of, not even necessarily that they're managing on some level. It could almost be at the point where the machines are actually running the show now. You know what I mean? It's like they trust that data over their own judgment now. And the more we feed it, the more we feed it, like I was saying, these things in our pocket, it's the fuel for that data system, basically. So if you hold a mirror up, if we were to hold a mirror up to what we consider the problems to be or whatnot, you could argue that it's our input that's having a big input on what's occurring.
Exactly. We have what they're doing is trying to put us in a cage. They're creating all these boxes, and it's like they're trying to put us into that box, but it's just a total artificial. I mean, they've already put us into a, so to speak, with all our civilization, so to speak. So everybody is in that civilization box, but that is created. That's all artificial. And what I wanted to say was, what about free energy? Wadiano, you have free energy ideas? I mean, because if there's in fact energy out there, which we know there is energy, just because we have Wi-Fi, data floats on the air, basically.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
if we all had our own energy box, That's that. Oh, no, they don't have control over that. It's all gone. Right?
I guess so. I mean, I think because energy, the energy that we use, by that I mean electricity being the obvious one, but also, pardon me, like hydrocarbons. It's the infrastructure that costs, if you like. So, I mean, maybe I'm a little bit off on a tangent. So, oil is free, but getting it isn't. So it's all there and free. So
I mean, what about solar panels? I mean, you have solar panels that generates energy out of the air.
Yeah, someone's got to make them though. I mean,
but there's also
solar panels, solar panels are being sold at a discount and have been since the beginning. They're very highly discounted. The technology to just create.
My point is though that solar panels, again, somebody has to make them, but there are. I mean, I've heard about a lot of different. I mean, you could run your car on water. You can create a magnetic motor. I mean, that will create energy.
I've not seen anything viable. Yeah, antennas into the air. Yeah, I've heard of that. Like, because there's a potential difference, which is what we call voltage. Is a potential difference. As you go up in height, there's a voltage difference. If you could get one wire up 100 miles and then one wire plugged into the ground, there's a potential difference there. I mean, it's not something I've experimented with, but I've heard you can get sort of millivolt readings just on like a 10-meter high. You get a 10-meter high stick and put a wire on the top and have the other wire plugged into the ground. You put a meter across it, and you'll read a potential difference. You'll read a voltage, but there's not much current. There's not much current. But I mean, I have quite a deep interest in so-called free energy, and I've not seen anything that comes close to that. The only sort of, let's say, viable rumors I've heard is the work of Tesla. But I wasn't there. I don't know. I mean, what I will say about Tesla is, he was a guy who would have an idea and he'd go and try and build it. And part of my feeling about that is, I was having this conversation with Sinker a few days ago, and it's if you've got someone like Einstein who's sort of theorizing, then there's only a handful of people in the world who can follow his theories. But if you've got a guy who's building stuff in his workshop, then there's actually something there that physically exists that can be demonstrated, and people can come along and you can go, check it out, it works, check it out, and then it can be explored. But if things remain theoretical, then I mean, who here understands E equals MC squared? I mean, I kind of know what all the terms mean, but do I understand it?
Well, first of all, E equals MC squared is a theory, and that's never been proven. I knew a guy who
that's my point.
was at Stanford.
Oh, go on.
They spent all kinds of money. They never came up with anything. So again,
Einstein
I think
himself wasn't happy with it.
Right, Einstein was a farce. I mean, he was like a. He
was brought in at a time to.
He was a
to give us a.
They just sat around and made up shit. They called it a theory. That's why it's called a theory, because they never proved it.
That's right.
So, but my point was, as far as all these things that what you were saying, people who actually do these things can prove out the stuff with the electricity. There are people that have I've seen some of these things, but you can't talk about this stuff because you'll get off. I mean, I there's just so many stories I've heard of, people who came up with it and they're
Stanley Mayer is the classic example, isn't it? Running the car on water.
I've seen that. person that this gentleman, we were at a conference, and he, poured water in, and he showed how it and everything. And, it was, again, the car itself was not, built out. It wasn't like a fancy car that we would drive today, but it was a frame. It had wheels on it. It was,
propulsion.
It moved, right? I mean, it wasn't like it just, it worked. So, and you see these things I've seen like probably that at least three times. And then, like I said, I've been around a lot of people who are inventors, and they actually build these things. And, next thing you know, you don't see them anymore. It's like, what happened to them? Where'd they go? Kind of bizarre. But yeah. And as far as the electricity thing too, I mean, it's, I know someone who's got this, some sort of a contraption, but, I'm not going to say anything more, but, it's out there, but they don't want to put it, they make money off of it. And the bigger thing, like all this stuff is all about control, because again, if people had their own access to energy, we wouldn't need all these data centers, all these, ISPs, all these, all the infrastructure that they have built in order to control. It's just like, which started with the electricity, right? I mean, that's the whole thing about Tesla and Edison. Tesla wanted to give it away free, and Edison said, no, we gotta put it through a wire and make everybody pay for it. And you, as an electrician,
I mean that's how the story goes.
Well, at least they've never told you though that electricity doesn't actually go through the wires, right?
Yeah, I mean it's sort of a combination of the two, isn't it? As far as I can make out. I mean, you're sort of moving into sort of quantum theory when you start talking about how does the energy get from one end of the wire to the other. Because the component of it is you've got the electrons that are flowing in the wire, although that's a model. Like the model of the electron is a model. But it's the best model we have currently that I'm aware of. But then you've also got the EMF, the electromotive field, or the electromotive radiation that's around the wire. When you pass a current through a wire, you get a field, a magnetic field around it. And the latest theory I've heard is that it's a combination of those two things that allows the power to run. So to me, then immediately you're talking about ether. And then once you get into ether, then it becomes this sort of Einstein v Tesla argument, whereas Tesla was going ether, and Einstein's going, no, it's space-time, and he's doing all the theory, which none of us understand, so we can't say whether he's right or wrong, really. But back to my point, like Tesla was building machines, and then
what did it mean by ether?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. What did it actually mean? What is ether?
So it's the idea that things... energy travels in waves, and waves require a medium. So sound won't travel in a vacuum. It needs a medium, whether it's a solid or a liquid or a gas. Sound will only propagate through that. Yeah, because much like dropping a stone in a pond. But then,
analog radio.
Well, it doesn't matter whether it's analog or not. The idea of radio
but what I'm saying is it goes through the air, right? There's a frequency. It doesn't go
through the air. No, it doesn't go through the air.
How does it get to your transistor radio?
Right. So, very sort of briefly. So, if you have, the difference between AC and DC.
Yeah.
So, an alternating current has a wavelength, and it goes positive, then the opposite amplitude negative. And if once you get up to about 15 kilohertz. So what happens is you put a voltage or a current into a wire, and you get this electromagnetic field that generates around the wire. And then when that waveform goes negative, that field collapses. And then as it goes through zero, it collapses back into the wire. And then as it passes and goes negative, it comes out again. So you've got this collapsing and expanding waveform that follows the frequency, if you're following me. And then once you get up to about 15,000 hertz or cycles per second, by the time that wave collapses, it doesn't have time to collapse back in before the next one is pushing it out again. And then so it just carries on propagating out into the world. And that's what radio is. So, but that's a wave. And then talking about sound, it has to propagate through something.
Sorry to stop you. Stupid question time again. When you say a wave, can you are we talking about electrons? Like, what is the consistent basis of the wave? Like, what is
this is it, isn't it? I mean, with light, it's photons, but then there's an argument as to whether it's
like light.
So is light a wave or a particle? And now they can't decide, so they're calling it a wavicle. Are they little packets of energy, or is it a wave? Because
it can't be a wave though, because light, when you turn on a light, it just turns on. It's there. It doesn't. Yeah, but you don't have to wait for it to wobble over.
But light travels at 300,000 kilometers a second or thereabouts, and the waveform is so small that you can't see it. Well, you do, but you see it as light. I mean, we're talking about exploring how our senses operate, right? So the idea, going back to this idea that a wave requires a medium, so much like a wave in an ocean only works because it's in water.
Yeah.
And sound only travels through, like a gas or a liquid or a solid. So the argument is, well, how does a radio wave propagate? If it's been proven that a radio wave will travel through a vacuum, so then that's the argument. Well, maybe it's not a wave. Maybe there are particles. But if you go back to the idea that it's a wave, then there has to be a medium that it's traveling through. So then you go, okay, well, so what is it about a magnet? If you put two magnets together and they're attracting each other, how are they doing that with no visible physical attraction? It just doesn't make sense, right? Now, if you say, so maybe there's this thing called ether, which underpins our entire reality. It's this kind of in the background structure that everything hangs on.
Vacuum or no?
It's our black goo. Or our goo.
But it's just this kind of, it's kind of like
black,
the framework
but it's goo.
It's kind of like a framework that our entire reality hangs on, and that's what ether is. So radio waves or electromagnetic waves, which includes visible light.
Yeah,
that's just our eyes just pick up.
We have the technology within ourselves, because if you think about what we just were talking about Zealberg, and he jumped into the chat, we sent him a little email.
I mean this is it. So ether is this kind of thing. Maybe that's where thoughts occur. That's maybe how thoughts are transmitted, or like you say, oh, where's so and so, and then lo and behold they appear.
Right. So that's what my point was about all these boxes that they've created of lights and electrical connections, and they're putting all this data, quote unquote data, into them, when we've already have the technology to do it ourselves, but they cannot control that. And this way they're telling us this is how they're going to control us. It's a simulacra, it's an artificial representation of what. And then of course they're not telling us that we have that capability. They don't tell us how powerful we are, or how much we can tell them that, go ahead, and we can ignore them and not have to worry about a thing. But this is how they control us.
I think so, yeah, but that's not the whole picture, though, is it? Like, coming at it from an engineering perspective, this is man's curiosity. It started off with the lodestone, this sort of naturally occurring magnet, and then just through tinkering and dicking around with that, fast forward 500 years, and we're sat here now. We're all in different points in the world, right? But it doesn't, and it's just another tool, right? These are just tools that we, the engineers, have created. And certain elements in our society are using them to, maintain their position and keep us down and them up. And it's that, and it's just an ever increasing complexity of a cage. But it doesn't
It's
mean
the
that the
money
technology
game.
itself is inherent. Well, of course it is.
It's the
all
money
about
game
money.
all over again, because they created the monopoly game and gave us the money and said, here you go, and all the power is going to be put in that money, and we're going to keep all that money for ourselves so we can keep the power. It's kind of the same thing.
Sure. Yeah, certainly. But electricity fundamentally, and the idea of generating electricity and using it to power devices and heaters and all the stuff that we like, that's not inherently anything. It's just a tool. You know, like a hammer can be a murder weapon, or it can knock a nail in, right? A gun doesn't kill somebody; it's the person on the other end of it.
That's how they use it.
The point. Yeah, that's how they use it.
The only way they can do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, and not everyone is using it like that. There are genuinely people out there who, and I'm one of them, that, you know, good things come from being connected. Good things come from electricity. Good things come from radio and all these other things. It's just
if I was a magician, I could do bad things with my magic too. I mean, if I knew how to.
Black witch, white witch.
Yeah. It's the same thing. It's just they have put it in a box, sold it to us for $9.99. I mean,
yeah, but the nature of electricity as we know it there needs to be an infrastructure, and there needs to be, you know, you generate it in one place and then you distribute it, and but that leaves it wide open for control. Obviously, I mean, we can't really all have generators. I mean, I know this is where we came in. If we could all have free energy, then we would be able to power our things, but it wouldn't connect us to each other necessarily unless we're tapping into telepathy, which you've also touched upon. I mean, you know, maybe we took a left turn way back in history where perhaps we could have worked on our psychic abilities, and we'd all be connected in that way. But, you know, that's kind of not where we are, because
I mean, just think of it right now.
Material, doesn't it?
Where are you? You are in the UK, London. And I'm in California, and we're talking like we're in the same room.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing, right? There's something inherently evil about that.
Waves? What wire is that going through? I mean, it's like instantaneous. It's
yeah, because it's traveling along a fiber optic mostly.
It's definitely not. So, what I'm saying is, it's not what they're telling us. Obviously,
what do you mean it's not?
Something
it's
else.
Not what they're telling us. What do you mean? Because as an engineer, I can see very clearly how it's happening.
But it's okay if my voice has to go through under the water, through a wire.
No, not a wire.
From
a fiber optic.
Where you are, all the way to me in California.
Yeah, it's a fiber optic. So it's traveling at the speed of light, and light or electricity in a wire travels at close to the speed of light, which is deemed to be in the region of 300,000 kilometers per second. So from here to California is what, 9,000 miles? No, it's a blink. It's the blink of an eye. It really is the blink of an eye. I mean, there used to be a time, you know, I can remember my parents phoning somebody in Australia way back when I was a kid, and everything was down a copper wire, and there'd be like a real delay. There'd be like, I mean, I can't remember exactly, but, you know, you had to speak and then wait for them to respond, because the propagation took so much longer. But now we're using light to propagate the information.
But there's another sort of a weird phenomenon there, which is like last night I was trying to tune in on the shortwave radio band. I got this gizmo for the laptop, and, you know, I was trying to tune into these Russian military channels, which are probably Cold War antiques that are still buzzing away there on shortwave radio. But like I was getting these super distant signals, but they were coming from a geographic source, and the sensation of listening to, in that sense, was completely different to the sensation I have now talking, you know, with Beachy in California. Because on the shortwave radio, I had a real sense of distance and a real sense of something moving over the land, and you know, even ether, that kind of connectivity to a different. It put me into a different frame of mind. And so it's like this.
Yeah, because it's analog. It's really that feel of the wave rolling over the land, and then it's almost like hearing somebody shout in a way. You know, that you get a sense of the distance just based upon the sound that you're hearing. But with digital, it's very different because it's encoded into noughts and ones and then transmitted and then decoded at the end back into audio. But all of this is happening, you know, at the speed of light. It's that really. So there is, you know, there's definitely a different sensation. Yeah, for sure.
I think it was like I don't know if it was a Native American thing or somebody, you know, they're thinking about flight. Like when you fly somewhere, that when you by the time you land after the flight, you had to wait for your soul to catch up with you, because the technology had kind of divorced you from your physical, spiritual self, and it had spun you off into some other, you know, fragmentary place, and you had to wait to reconnect. So I kind of think that's what's happened with this reality, this technology revolution that we're in. It's sort of disconnected us, and it's given us this facade that we now relate to, that's spun us out a little bit. And you're in danger of being in this kind of plastic world where the referential self has been unanchored. The anchor has been pulled up, and you kind of had the rug pulled from under you, and the society, man, is spinning as such, you know, in that vortex, you know, of zeros and ones. And
because I mean, the beauty of analog transmission, like shortwave, is that how it happens is you generate a carrier wave at a particular frequency, and that's the frequency that you pick out on your radio tuner, where like 100 megahertz. Shortwave is much lower, and then you modulate your audio signal onto it. So you have your carrier wave, and then you mix your audio into it, so you get this sort of complex wave. So it has a carrier wave with the audio modulated onto that wave, and then the receiver just removes the carrier wave, and then what you're left with is the audio. That's how radio works. I mean, there's AM and FM; they do it slightly differently, but it's the same principle. You have your carrier.
You mentioned ether there a while ago. Could you give, like, you know, someone like myself, a limited kind of understanding of this stuff, is there any way we could sort of visualize how something like, you know, a mile square of airspace, if we could see the radio frequencies in that, the etheric space, what might it look like? Would it look like strands of hair or a liquid form, or would we see?
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to your chat today, and you talked about your opening monologue where you were talking about being in a swimming pool.
Yeah.
And water is a very good analogy for both electricity and electromagnetic radiation. So if you imagine, if you take a square kilometre of ocean, there's lots of currents going on in there. Right? It's not completely still. I'm not talking about the molecular movement, but just the waves going through an ocean. They're complex. You know, there's countless different waveforms, and they're all interacting with each other. So my sort of idea of ether, it's something like that, but it's almost in another dimension. It's you can't see it directly. You can only see the effect of it. If indeed ether is a thing. I mean, again, it's just a model that we're using to try and explain phenomena that we observe. You know,
and how might it be connected to consciousness itself, or a projection of consciousness, or what's the interplay, perhaps even in sci-fi terms, maybe with consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine they're very close cousins. I mean, that's just how I imagine it to be. That if you can start to zero in on ether, then you're probably going to start to zero in on this medium where consciousness resides.
Or certainly, one is a resonance of the other, perhaps.
One takes advantage of the other. I mean, it's maybe there's an etheric quality to inside our minds, and our brain is the interface, the decoder.
All the terms are interchangeable.
Yeah.
I would say it's more water. I would contend that air basically is water, because if you think about, fish need water to live, and we need air to live. So it's kind of,
yeah. I mean, gases and liquids are, you can lump them all together as liquids.
Well, but again, there's also a the water component. Like, there's so much we don't know about water as well. And, water can be gas, water can be a liquid, water can be a solid. So,
yeah, a lot of elements. You can say that, yeah.
Right.
But
So
did
to
Tesla
me,
ever give
we
any
are fish,
delineation
we
of?
need to be in the water. I think he was an ether person. Tesla was.
Yeah, no, he
Did
was
he-
definitely. Yeah, he definitely was ether, and Einstein.
Did he ever attempt to explain it? What his concept of it was, or any notes or essays on it?
Nothing that springs to mind. I mean, nothing beyond what we've sort of postulated.
If you read Walter Russell talks about ether.
Yeah, Walter Russell's a good one to get into.
And a Steiner, I think, touches on it. I'm not sure if he was totally on board. A lot of those pre-1900s or early 1900s people were more about ether, and then they kind of the scientism people came in and no, it's they
pretty much
debunked
that's what happened. Yeah, we got steered away from it.
I mean, thousands of years or hundreds of years were on board with the ether concept, and then they just came and wiped it out with
I'm more into the idea of
came and wiped out homeopathy. Kind of seems like a lot of the crap that we're into now, like I said, all this technology and stuff is it's a simulacra for what is in the natural world. They've just created a material representation of it. Like the wires.
Conjures up this. I think there's a poetic version of ether as well. I could hear the poets talking about ether. Like it was a source of inspiration, like some sort of I don't know what you would call it. As you said, another other dimension type deal. Vril. Or
I mean, like trying to be as concise as possible. To me, ether is a medium, is a medium that electromagnetic radiation moves through, whether it's light or radio. To me, like a wave has to have a medium, otherwise it can't be a wave.
But everything is a vibration. So if you consider our voices is a vibration, when you're creating a person, like say you're, or a plant is a seed is budding, that's all vibration. It's all created starting with the vibrations. So
the vibration
as you move those vibrations through the ether, then things are created.
Yeah, like Schauberger, Victor Schauberger.
That's how the material is created. Yes. That's who I was trying to think of. I never remember his name.
Victor Schauberger. Yeah, so it's kind of like the vibration is formed first, and then the material matter.
In the beginning was the word.
That's interesting. You say that. Like I read a little while ago that it's apparently a mistranslation. It's in a beginning is the word.
Well, yeah, it's language is technology. Language is another box because really everything is vibration, sound.
Have you read The Alphabet versus the Goddess?
No, I have not. I've heard of that though.
Yeah, so it's the idea that, I mean, I think this is sort of in tune with what the thrust of what you're saying. What I'm picking up from you is that. So the alphabet versus the goddess. It's the argument that there was a time when we were more in tune with ourselves, let's say, and as we applied language to communicate, we've only got room for one or the other. And so where we find ourselves now is we've pushed out this idea and now we're dealing with language and electricity in that way. Whereas there's an argument that if we'd have taken a different path, then we could still, we might still have been communicating now, but we wouldn't be using technology to communicate.
Well, I think our thoughts are more in a chunk of data, like a picture and, you know, a color, and, you know, it's like an image or a symbol. And when they brought in the language, that kind of put it in a box, right? It put it into this word. Yeah. Now you're using a word, which again is a type of control and because it, you know, somebody once said, and I thought it was fascinating, where they said, you know, today we don't have a word for something, we don't know what it is, or we can't, you know, visualize it, whatever, when it should be the other way around.
You can't communicate it. You might have an understanding of it yourself, but you won't be able to communicate it without language.
Exactly. Anyway, yeah, it is. Now we're going into like some, you know, the woo-woo stuff, but that's where we lose people a lot.
Well, it's just difficult. It's just difficult to quantify. That's all. That's all it is because we don't have a language for it, and we don't have examples that are provable. You know, we're really in the realms of belief.
Yeah. Well, and what you said before is that we don't. If we don't have a word for it, we can't imagine it, and so what it's all based on our imagination. Where, you know, that's one of our superpowers is we imagine and we create things by imagining them, or.
I mean, it's almost like we're using technology to become one by connecting ourselves. You know, there's this sort of, to me, there's no doubt that we're all one, that everything is all one, but we have this illusion that everything is separate, whereas actually it's not.
Yeah.
But if we were all one, then we wouldn't be able to have this experience of being individual in a shared experience. So it's all right, it's fine, and technology is slowly edging us towards this unity again, where everything is completely connected, and then we'll be all one again. But if we're all one, then we can't have the experience that we're having now, because it's only the fact that we're separate that you can have a conversation. So it gets very esoteric, doesn't it, really?
Back to the paradox.
But how did we get here?
Like the electric company. Electricity. All the energy you want. All the service you need.
No keyboard performances, just the occasional pressing of buttons, turning of switches. No where things are set up. You just press a button and things happen.